It's August 11th, 2021, and we're talking to the new head of CLG, Greg Kim, about taking stock of the organization and making plans for the future. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and today I'm joined by Greg Kim, the head of CounterLogic Gaming. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we've talked a fair amount in the last couple of years in the background, now and then checking in on things. I know that we met first when you were at Riot, and then talked a little bit in your transition into working with Evil Geniuses, and now you moved on to CLG. So, I know a bit of your backstory, but why don't you fill everyone in who's watching who may not kind of know who you are, where you come from, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey in esports.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a journey. I guess I'll start from the beginning. I mean, my professional career started in not esports. I'm originally a non-endemic, like one of those. I started in IT consulting, doing project management and enterprise solution implementations in the healthcare and the tech and educational space. It was like a really good place to learn how to be a good professional and make presentations, engage with clients and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't what I was excited about. So actually went to get my MBA from MIT Sloan, where I really wanted to think about doing something for my career that I was more passionate about. And I would say the two things that I grew up most passionate about were sports and video games. And esports is nicely at the intersection of those two things. So coming out of Sloan, got an internship with Riot Games and eventually went there full time and started my esports career working for the LCS. I did strategy and data analytics for the league, which is basically thinking a lot about viewership performance, doing a lot of audience research. If anyone ever got one of those surveys at the end of their League of Legends games that asked about esports or the LCS, that was probably me in 2018 and 2019. Really thinking about how to strategically advance the LCS or iterate on the product, all that kind of stuff. But right up until the October of 2019, when EG got the Echo Fox slot in the league, they plucked that slot, and as you may recall, had no assets. Like all the Echo Fox contracts, players, staff, everything was cleared out in that exit. So EG picked me up, and I was tasked with building a League of Legends team from scratch. Everything from signing our players and coaches and staff to helping us find a facility in LA and everything, and did that for about 6 months plus before transitioning into working all EV sports for EG, being responsible for competitive ops and gaming strategy across all of our titles. And then right up until about 2 months ago, I was there and have now started at CLG, where I'm responsible for the whole business, as opposed to just like the gaming competitive ops. I essentially stepped in to run the organization, and I'm the direct link back to New York and everyone at Madison Square Garden insofar as CLG goes.
So who was filling this role before you took it over for CLG? Is this basically replacing, like Hotshot wasn't hands on for quite a while now, right? It's not him in that.
Correct. Yeah. So I was stepping in for Dan Fleeter, who is essentially running the CLG business for Madison Square Garden before, and he's back in New York now, and he's working on the MSG Sports business more broadly. And he actually kind of has been doing a bit of everything for some time. So now that I'm back, now that I'm in the saddle, like we have a dedicated CLG leader that's pretty much very much focused on this business. And, I think we'll get into it, I'm sure, but I have a bit more competitive and endemic background. So I think a little bit more leadership on our competitive side of stuff too.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's one of those things that you have to balance between, running the team as a business, right? Like how do we generate revenue and kind of classic startup stuff versus as a competitive entity that wants to win games. Those things feed into each other, but they're not quite the same like set of goals and targets, right?
Totally.
So, that'll be interesting to see how that pans out for you. What led you to kind of make this change? I guess first of all, the change into being on the team side of things when you were in Riot. Why did you join EG?
Yeah. I mean, that first jump was super exciting. I think, coming into esports, I didn't exactly know what I specifically wanted my career in esports to be, right? Whether it's sticking with the league and like being
Mm,
commissioner someday, whether it was going team side. But after spending some time working on really the numbers and the performance behind the league, the opportunity to actually jump into the team side and sort of play out that fantasy of being like a
mm,
GM or team president and building a team from scratch and really like diving in head first was super exciting to me.
mm.
And that's the kind of situation where there's only one of 10 of that job in North America, right?
Yeah,
And there's only one of, and at least at like the scale of a major region or like
yeah,
a world's qualifying type of team, like there's only one of so many of that job in the world, right? So that's what was super exciting to me. It was also the opportunity to build and drive and really push myself and see what I could do in this space. It definitely was a learning experience, as I'm sure the CLG job is going to be a huge learning experience. But I think to me, it's like the once lifetime opportunity and just sort of take it and see where it takes you for sure.
was this something where the job posting was out there and you saw it and you're like, hey, I'm going to go after that, or were you approached? Like, did you have existing relationships?
Someone put me in touch with EG, and I think I can't speak totally for Nicole, but I think at the time they were, EG's headquartered in Seattle, right? And everything
Right.
League of Legends, of course, is in LA. And although EG had been in League of Legends in the past, like it had been some
Times had
time,
changed.
especially yeah, permanent partnerships, definitely different era of the LCS than before. But I think there was a desire to get someone who had an understanding of not just the competitive ecosystem, but the league and how to operate with Riot and maintain good relationships there and navigate just not just being a team on the Rift, but also a team that partners with the league and learns how to work with the league and other
Yeah.
folks around there. And that was, I think, where I sort of had a unique skill set and perspective and sort of some of the right, I guess, professional skill upside to come into that kind of role and be able to craft a strategy, articulate a strategy, and work with our leadership at EG to build something.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll get a little more into some the journey through the EG time and now into the CLG time. But I think before we move into that, what would be some of the reasons that you think like CLG fans should be excited about you coming into this organization now that you've made this change? And
Yeah,
maybe
I think
maybe moving into that, why they changed from EG into CLG? What makes you excited about this change, and how should that kind of
yeah.
like flow through?
Yeah, I'll tackle the second and then move into the
Sure.
first. I mean, I think first of all, like starting like it's kind of a bigger job and in the same way that EG job was a huge learning opportunity, a chance to jump into something new. This is that same thing. At EG, my job description is very much leading our gaming operations, right? So it's
Yeah.
all the fun of managing the players and the teams and some of the relationships with the leagues. But this job is really um going beyond that, like as opposed to being like the voice of gaming strategy within an org, this is really incorporating that and also thinking about how to lead a marketing team, how to do the sales.
Mm,
And like, well, I would have touch points before. Now I'm like responsible for the whole thing.
sure.
So definitely like a great learning experience, a nice step up, and I think a good test for me to see what I can do with the opportunity and learn as much as I can in the process. And then there's the added factor of like I grew up in New York City. Like I was there from birth through college, and
Yeah.
I grew up a fan of the Knicks. And I think if
Hell
you had
yeah.
asked me at 13 years old whether I'd ever have a chance to work for the Garden, I don't think I would have imagined it like this. But
Mm,
it is a dream come true in those respects. Like
cool.
I think they printed I posted this on Instagram the other day. They printed a Knicks jersey with my like gamer tag on it the other day. I was like, well, it's crazy. Like I never would have imagined this. So I think an element of sentimentality there, an intimate element of learning experience there, and just excitement for what we have here, right? I think CLG is a legacy esports org. It's a very different problem space than what we had at Evil Geniuses in the LCS because at EG we're trying to be a new team and build a fandom and get people to care about us and
Hmm.
grab attention. For here, it's we have a lot of loyal fans who've been around for a while. They're understandably frustrated, and I
Yeah.
think we
Some
captured
of some of them may
the
have gone
attention.
underground,
Yeah, and
but I
I
think they're
think
still
we
there.
captured the attention of the league in some ways that we probably wouldn't have wanted to in the last couple of weeks. But like, I think I see that we've stuff to learn from some of the experiences towards
Yeah.
the end of the split, but at the same time, like for people to care about us like that, like that's an asset, and I think it's about how do you channel that into something more exciting? So so great opportunity there, and I think that leads into hopefully why CLG fans can be excited. I think for me, there are a couple things that come to mind now. I'm sure it'll evolve over time, but one, I think this gives us a visible voice and leader, right? I'm here to set a direction for CLG where it feels like maybe there hasn't been so much of one for CLG as an org over the last couple years. I'm here to try to be that external voice a little bit more. Granted, like being a talking head and doing the marketing stuff isn't my area of strength. I would say it's more stretch zone than comfort zone, but I will get out there. I did an AMA, I think a week or two ago, and I think it'll help give our org a voice and a way to engage and interact with fans. And yeah, I think compared to prior leadership, I come from a more competitive endemic background. Granted, my strength is in League of Legends and not as much the other titles that we're in, but there's a voice at the top who's going to work to structure things on the competitive side. It's not going to be my whole job as it was at EG, but it's an area of comparative strength of mine. I don't know about compared to the rest of the world, but for me, it's at least experience I have that I can bring to the table. So, I think more holistic leadership across the board, some more tapped in strategic direction, and for better or worse, a lightning rod for the public to engage with when things are going well or things are going poorly, for sure.
Yeah, you'd be the IMT Noah kind of face out there.
Sure.
Maybe there's a different example. I don't know. Are there any of those like organizational faces that you're gonna try to aspire to learn from a little bit or emulate?
Um, I'll
Who
try
do you
to do
think does it
me. I mean,
well?
it's so interesting, especially with esports teams and how they're all set up and how they're structured, and it's interesting how it all intersects together. Because you have teams where like the face of the org or the CEO of the org is very tapped in and dialed into
Yeah,
everything that the league team is doing, right? Like I don't know, like folks like Jack and Steve come
yeah,
to mind, or like Reggie in that respect, and like there are other teams kind of like EG where like the CEO isn't the competitive person, like they have a person, right?
yeah.
Or like that was me, or for
Right.
Immortals, it's not the CEO of Immortals, it's Mike Schwartz, etc. And
Yeah.
so I think for me, it's crafting that balance. And I think for me, also, one of the challenges will be finding that work balance where I can't just pay attention to our competitive side, and
Yeah.
especially not just our league team. 'Cause we have other teams at CLG that are actually doing quite well across the board, and thinking about how to market those guys and how to help set a brand direction and strategic
Mhm.
direction and work with our marketing teams and stuff. Like that's just as important as the competitive stuff. So finding the right balance, I think, is going to be important.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting how the different orgs seem to manage that. Like, what is the face we put forward? Obviously, you put the players forward as much as you can and make them because the fans have such an attachment to them. But then you have sometimes, like you said, like Jack with C9, Steve with Team Liquid, all the way down to the team manager doing it for Dignitas or the head coach for Evil Geniuses lately. I'd say is more Peter Dunn being the face a little bit more for the league team, right? And so just finding that, and I guess part of that from where you're positioned right now will depend on, who are you moving forward with into 2022. It's hard to develop that strategy outside of yourself, who is going to be there, right? Because you don't necessarily know everything about, who's going to, whether for whatever set of reasons, who's going to be moving forward into the next season. And so, yeah, I'm sure that's an interesting kind of problem to tackle. Uh, Given that this is a bit of a change of kind of job duties coming from EG to CLG, you're moving into a little bit of a higher level. What would you say are some of the most important things you've learned during your time at EG that you're going to be able to kind of carry through?
Yeah, I would say um, the first like big learning experience I think was just like team ops, right? Like nothing really prepares you for that
Mm.
aside from like being in it, like from the fan perspective, or like, I was a fan before I worked for Riot and before the LCS, and even when I was working on the LCS, right, I was engaging with our audience numbers and I was watching the product, but when it came to teams and competition, like I was just a fan. Like I don't think you on that side, it's hard to get a full like appreciation of everything that goes into it and the nuance of what goes into it and how you work with players and
Yeah.
how much like stuff like structure can matter. So I think like the first biggest lesson was probably just like the team ops and management stuff. I think the second biggest thing would have been was just sort of like the business element, like how to work with leagues and how to position yourself for success in the long run, not just as a competitive team, but with as a business and given business considerations.
Mm.
And I think the third was just having experience with one of the more professional esports orgs, and thinking very intently about how to operate like a clean esports operation, and get into stuff, all the stuff like employment law and all these other crazy things. But I think to dig into each of those, like on the team up side, like I EG is a unique experience in that we got to build from scratch, right?
Yeah.
So this is really like it's sort of taking all the inputs as fast as possible about like what the accepted norms were in League of Legends and how other teams operate, while also trying to input like um my style of leadership or my style of culture, and also incorporate like, I was working very closely with Andy Barden, like what his principles were and what his priorities were, and ultimately
Yeah.
like what our coaches wanted to do.
And
Um,
Andy is the general manager of the team, right? So he'd be a little bit more hands on,
Hands
or
on for
yeah.
sure. Yeah. And he's managing pretty much. He started out in the same way that I started with League and expanded to everything. And he also, he and I were in the trenches together building the League team, and then also expanded across titles.
Yeah.
Um, so so yeah, I mean, I think I had a chance to really learn from our players over the years, and our coaches, like some sense of what works and what doesn't. I don't think I've seen every iteration of what a behind the scenes League of Legends team looks like, but I've certainly seen what I don't want to say struggling, but like a team that has some more challenges in last year, and also a team
Mhm.
that um we really believed in, and developed the structure of from year two. It's given me a bunch of perspective there, and a little bit of what to look for in staff and what to do when building an operation and a culture. I think that was probably the biggest culture shock and learning experience for
Mhm.
sure. And I think you sort of see that in how we really viewed the ecosystem from year one to year two, and how we wanted to structure things year one to year two. I mean, year one, it was like we were in a frantic scramble to just like get players and coaches, right? I think
Yeah.
we felt pretty good about what we ended up with at the end of the day. But you just look at the evolution from that coaching staff and operation to I keep saying we, but what EG has now and what EG's won, like the coaching staff was split with, like,
Yeah.
we increased headcount, we expanded to down to amateur to 3 teams, and there was definitely a lot that went into that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
like that's
can
just the
we
competitive team op stuff, right?
can we
Mhm.
pull a little bit of that apart? Because I'm curious about going back to building that. I don't want to dwell too much on the history here, and I do want to talk about the future and CLG and all that. But I would love to hear a little bit about, like you said, when they picked up the slot from Echo Fox, none of the player contracts or anything like that came along. And I think we've seen in some situations where players do carry through. Can you tell us, like, was that just natural contract expiration, or was that like, hey, it's a new org, those contracts aren't valid, and we just choose we're not going to sign new ones? Or
Yeah, I can't speak to it with a ton of expertise, but basically, like, I'm pretty sure, and I'm not going to use the right terminology, but like when Echo Fox lost the slot, they just everything was like nulled and voided, or
sure.
like voided at that point, or like
And
terminated
not
at that
not
point.
by an intentional choice of theirs. Is just naturally, hey, the org is done.
Yeah,
These contracts are
yeah,
over.
yeah. And I wasn't at EG at the time, so I don't know like how the transition worked, but I'm pretty sure like
Okay.
it wasn't like EG acquired Echo Fox's assets. It was more
Right.
EG acquired the slot
The
from
slot, yeah.
LCS, but like didn't have any of those assets. So
And then you guys to deal with like trying to get in that short time span to get a roster on, you had this massive buyout package from Cloud9, and that had certain parts that have worked out and certain parts that have, like, maybe not quite delivered to the level of expectation. What was that process like in picking up this big package? Because I'm curious whether you do it again, or whether you take that kind of an approach with CLG now, or
yeah, so I take actually one step back, Tim,
sure.
and sort of go into it like going into free agency. Like I came on, I want to say like October 15th of 2019, right? And so a lot of teams like they start thinking about offseason as soon as they're out of it. And
Yeah,
I think
right
like
now.
we didn't actually bring Andy Barden on as our GM, I want to say, until like the end of that month, or so, like some point late in October. So
Hmm.
so it's not often that you only have a month to figure out like what the heck you're gonna do, like just from scratch. So like we really quickly had to come up with the plans, and I think
Yeah,
like for us it was thinking about, I think it centers around good process, right? It's like, what are our goals in LCS, like what do we want to accomplish, and what do we think is the team that'll help us get there, right? And I would say for the goals that we had about coming into the league, and also knowing that EG is an org that takes care of like cares about being competitively successful
Yeah.
and like taking things seriously. We weren't going to come in and just flop or spend minimum. Like
Right.
we wanted a team that would be competitively viable off the bat, and have upside for the future, right? And I
Hmm.
think like ending up with that C9 core and led to a lot of different things for us, right? Like that's how we got Bang interested. That's how we got Jizuke interested because he's talked in the public about how like he saw these pieces and saw something attractive. So I think
Sure.
like in a way, like that year one thing led to the other, and like that was just one of the scenarios we plotted out. Like a lot of free agency is just building out those decision trees. Like
Hmm.
scenario A with the C9 buyout, like this
Yeah.
enables X, Y, and Z branches. Like if we had gone full free agent route, we probably would have built around another player and ended up with a very different team.
Sure.
So I think in terms of what that direction gave us, like, I mean, that C9 that C9 buyout led to having a core, it led to attracting other free agents, and
Hmm.
Dennis and Daniele are still like the basis of EG's success currently. So I think I would say I would say for standing up an operation, it was worth it for sure because I
Hmm.
think that that helped us. I would like to say, I don't know exactly what all the players say about EG and what other staff say about EG, but for us, I like to think that it helped us establish a core basis for the program. It helped establish ourselves as like, you know, an org that was trying to do things the right way. And I think over the year, we tried to really prove that we had the right priorities and we had good structure. And I would like to think that that's what helped led to recruiting someone like Peter to join and give his input and take on the reins there. So ultimately, I see it as a success.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think those guys have a shot to win it all this summer. I hope they do. I'm very
Hmm.
proud of what we built over there. I'm very proud of those guys. So rooting for them on the side, even though I'm no longer with the org.
So now that you're moving into CLG, and this is a very different scenario, right? You're moving into something that has a long legacy, as you said, within the LCS. Not a brand new, we have no assets, so we have no contracts and players. Um, but so you have a bunch of players. Some of them are under contract. Some of those contracts are expiring. Actually, I should have looked up beforehand in case we want to get into that. But I know you guys have a continuing contract with Finn. I believe that was a 3-year deal he signed. I believe Brox is going to be a free agent. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think 2 or 3 your LCS contracts are expiring, right? And then you've got players in academy. Uh, how do you come into this, and then also the existing staff, right, managerial and coaching staff, and whatever else? How do you come in and get kind of acclimated and take stock of what you have in order to determine like here's what we're working with, here's what we move forward from, and how is that different from kind of the blank slate kind of approach?
Yeah, it's definitely a super different challenge. I don't know if it's harder or easier yet. I think time will
Mm-hmm.
tell on that one, but I think right now it feels like a more interesting and more difficult one because um coming in, I think the way I see it, like there's sort of two ways you can go about it, right? Or maybe there are more than two, but like the two that were apparent to me is like you can come in, you can try to insert yourself and just instill everything you know and that you've done and just like
Yeah.
imprint that on what the operation is. That's not what I've done. And for context, like I think I started my first week was um, right before like the TSM upset, so it was like towards the end of the season.
So you're taking
But I
credit
think
for the win, is what you're saying.
I wish. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like this all comes down to the players and coaches, and I think
Yeah,
same at
yeah.
EG, right? Those are the guys
Just
that are
mainly.
doing all the hard work. But I think the approach I've taken is just sort of to come in and observe and see like what we have. And I think the broad philosophy here, not just as a competitive leader, but as a leader of the company, is take a peer back at what's made this org successful and what the legacy is and what the culture is, and figure out how we can help build on that and adapt that to the future, right? Like in the same way, like every team has a different type of owner and leader at the top. Like I think I'm figuring out a little bit who I want to be and how that fits
Mm-hmm.
CLG. And also like going back to your question in terms of like how we run LCS, it's all right, like what's working well, what's not working well. What's everyone's experience been? I think one of the first things I did was start to meet all the players one on one and just hear about the year and their experience. And
Mm-hmm.
and their opinions on what's been successful and what's made us not as successful, and sort of take those as inputs. And I think as we go into those off season, I think we have a bunch of things to try to think about and fix. But I think for me, it all stems down to, how do we build a strategic direction for everything that we
Hmm.
do, right? Like for evolving our brand, for evolving our competitive presence, and having a clear-cut goal across the board. Like for our League of Legends team, like they should know exactly what they're aiming for, right? Like,
Hmm.
if Worlds is a standard, that's going to be our standard, and we're not dropping that over the course of the year. If it's a developmental year, like what are our goals, what kind of progress do we want to see, and like have that in mind and actually like driving around that. Like those are the kind of things that I feel like we haven't necessarily had as strongly in the past year, maybe the past 2 years. And I think there are other uh there's other, like in esports, stuff just happens, right? I think there have been some other things
Sure.
that have affected like team composition, or like you think about Crown 2 years ago. I don't think anyone could have anticipated
Right.
like that situation happening as it did. So
Yeah.
um I think for me, it's been one, observe, two, like see where the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities are, and three, like figure out how I can help lead and guide there. And I think ultimately, like build something that runs itself, because I have a bunch of other priorities across the company
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Of
worry
course.
about.
So, to whatever level of depth you're comfortable sharing, then what do you think some of those strengths are that the org has right now that you've seen coming in and say, hey, here's something I can work with?
Well, I think I spoke to one earlier. Like, I think just the fact that we have a fan base to engage with and interact with, like,
Hmm.
I think there's been a hunger for just for some direction out of CLG, and also just like a voice. I think Tafo's kind of had to shoulder that burden for the whole
Hmm.
org, because he's just like visible as the League of Legends GM, but I think he's had to do a bunch of stuff that you wouldn't normally expect a League of Legends GM to do on behalf of the org. So
Sure.
I think I think the fandom, and having a vibrant fandom to engage and work with and grow with, is super exciting. I think two, we have a lot of folks on board who've been at CLG for a while, for a long time, and they know what the history is. And I think there's still a lot of passion is and an understanding of like what's made us successful in the past. And I think those are assets to use as you think about how to build into the future. Um, and I think three, I'm hopeful, and I'm pretty excited about just taking things to the next level and evolving the relationship with MSG to the next level.
Hmm.
I think having someone who sits in New York who has a sense of what CLG is all about and what it's like to work in
Hmm.
esports and what the deal with esports is. I think like that leadership at MSG has evolved over time, and I think I think the conditions feel there's more opportunity, and there's, I think, more excitement around what we're doing compared to maybe what's the way it's been in the past. Granted, I wasn't here in the past, so I'm just hearing everything
Right.
secondhand, but I think there's a bunch of stuff to use to build, and I think the question is how do you orient all of those things in the right direction, and how do you like build structure properly and let the work and let the competition sing from everything that you set up.
Sure. I mean, I'm really curious on that MSG front because from an outsider perspective, right? Like just being someone who observes the LCS situation and what's going on there. At times, I would say it's felt like, or the community vibe has been that CLG being owned by MSG has been kind of a background thing. It's kind of had the perception that MSG bought CLG, kind of put it in a savings account, and decided to sit back and see what kind of interest it builds up, right? Rather than being really hands on and leveraging that MSG brand, which is a huge brand that should be able to build up a lot of excitement and fan loyalty and these kinds of things. Uh, do you feel like that relationship? I think you already kind of spoke to that. It feels like that relationship is starting to kind of click in a little bit more and get more intertwined. But
Yeah.
is that something that like how close are you going to be involved in building out that relationship and being able to make an opportunity or make use of that connection with
Yeah.
that huge org, right?
Yeah, I would say very close. I think to your point, I think there's more we can be thoughtful about in terms of connecting back to MSG, and like connecting also to like, you know, our core identity and our presence has always been like rooted in CLG as an esports org, but
Yeah.
like, we have a link back to New York that I don't think we've exploited at all. I don't know if that's going to be like a brand pillar of ours, but I think it's
Mm.
something we could definitely be more thoughtful about, because we are like a Madison Square Garden sports
Yeah.
property. Um, but I think to address your the core of your question, like I think a lot of the tie-in back to New York is like what doesn't go seen by the public and the fans. I'd say like over the last couple of years, from what I gather, like we've leveled up our professional capabilities a lot. Like working back in New York, like we have a lot of shared business functions that
Mm.
go back that we work with MSG on. I think those processes have gone a lot stronger over the last couple of years. But like fans don't care about like how well you're integrated with the parent company and how well you like share services and stuff, right? So,
Yeah.
but I think like there's a lot of progress there, and I think it's set a lot of foundations and a lot of groundwork to work with the folks back in New York. I would say like half my meetings are with folks back in New York, and I'm probably gonna be heading back there a bunch, which is
Cool.
convenient because it's
Yeah.
where I grew up and it's where home is.
Mm.
So I think we have a chance to evolve, and I think we have a chance to definitely grow that, and um, I think we have a chance to be thoughtful about how we build that together as a part of Madison Square Garden, and I think channel that into the CLG, more of the CLG that like our fans are looking for, right? Because I think there's a lot of what I say is going to come back to this, but I think there's a real opportunity to just try to have a direction, right, and a strategic identity, and have that be very clear to ourselves internally as an esports org, clear to our fans as our fans, and also clear back to New York and our parent company, and so that they know, understand like what we're doing and how to support us, and like that kind of clarity, like that momentum helps. Rising tide raises all ships, right?
Sure.
So that's a hope. We'll see how it goes in practice. This is a lot of what I've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks and what I have to work on a ton over the next couple of weeks and months. But I
Yeah.
think the opportunity is there, and I think like we have tools certainly to try to cut at it. Sure.
Is there? I don't want to be too pointed here, but I think there might be some part of the fan base that looks at what happened to Schalke 04 in the LEC and looks like, hey, they bought that slot, they invested into it, reasonably well, but at a certain point, it just became a low priority for that org, and they ended up just selling the slot and seeing the profit potential there. Is there any reason fans should be concerned about that as a potential outcome that MSG might just see, hey, this is actually a big, just immediate profit opportunity, and
Yeah.
we'll move on?
No chance. I think MSG has been pretty smart about thinking about esports a little bit. I think obviously from a fan external perspective, like there might have been some challenges over the last split in the last year, but I think MSG has a thoughtful approach to esports, and I think for all intents and purposes, like that's my job to help shape that narrative back to New York and
Mm.
continue to push things. I think there's a lot of confidence, and there's been a lot of support coming out of New York in terms of my initial meetings and what we're starting to want to do. And I think that's very much on me
Yeah.
to make sure that all those stars are aligned, and like that we're having clear communications, and that we're like using our resources properly. But
Mm.
this isn't like a pump and dump. I don't think like we're gonna be exiting anytime soon. Like it's definitely it's we're now like a part. Yeah, I don't think it was like this initially when MSG acquired CLG, but like we're part of the sports operation just as much as like the Knicks, the Rangers, 2K Gaming, Westchester Hawks, etc. So we're in the fold.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the kind of thing that when the team is struggling competitively, those fears are going to amp up a little bit, just because all the negative stuff is going to come up a little bit more. But the more you
Yeah,
succeed,
and it's ironic, right? Because I was a Knicks fan, right? I mean, like, thankfully, they didn't check my college socials like when I took the job. Otherwise, they would have seen a lot of complaining about some of the old Knicks teams. But like, I think these things ebb and flow, and hopefully we can drive to something. And like the tough memories will just be that tough memories, and like we'll create some better ones to go along with the legacy, and yeah, we'll look back at this year and remember it for what it was, but be happy about where we are.
who's your favorite all-time Knicks player?
So Jeremy Lin's a cop out, right? I think so. It's
Did you
this is
know
really
I was on
weird.
a panel with him at the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference? There's all kinds of
Yeah, I
intertwining
know
there.
because I organized that panel too.
Yeah, but they don't
Yeah,
know.
no, I think so this is where I'm very weird because like I was more of a fan of the underdog Knicks team. So like I kind of want to say David Lee or like Amari Stoudemire. I
Oh,
think my favorite all-time Knicks team was actually the one where it was Amari, the Amari Knicks like before the Carmelo trade. because like the expectations were lower. He was having like an MVP like start to the year, and they were just like underdogs, like going against everyone.
Mm.
I really love that team. So, yeah, it's funny to think about sort of like where the Knicks were and like where they've come. And I think they're in a really exciting spot this offseason. And like that kind of journey is hopefully like one we can replicate on the CLG side, right? Like come back from a couple of tough years and build something exciting to grow with.
I really enjoyed Jeremy Lin being one of the depth players on the Raptors. In their championship run, I got to point out to everybody along the way. That's my friend Jeremy Lin. We were on a panel together, and we're winning him a ring. So that was good
Yeah,
stuff.
for sure.
You've mentioned that one of the really big things you wanted to bring into CLG is like is setting goals, setting a vision, saying, "Hey, this is where we're headed together," which is one of the classic points of leadership, right? Like inspiring everybody into a shared vision. What would you say you want CLG to become or to represent? Like, what is that vision? And I guess the way Thomas Baker of the Game House put it in a question on Twitter was, what is your vision for CLG, especially considering how poorly they might sit with the current law community?
Um, Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough one to answer now because we're in the middle of just doing a lot of that. And we, our leadership and I think we as a company are doing a lot of that discovery in terms of like where we want to push. So I don't think that's something I can just say now, but I think what I can say is like a paradigm, right? You look at, excuse me, you look at what FlyQuest has done with their brand over the last couple years, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look at what 100 Thieves has done since coming into the league. Like you think about certain esports teams, what they're about, what they stand for, what their priorities are, and you can see that in a lot of the things that they do, sort of across the board. Like whether it's in the like, I think whether it's in the like marketing campaigns they run on social, whether it's how they activate like against League of Legends, it's like the jerseys they put out, it's the influencers they sign. I think like for us, I think the priority is to just have something cohesive and something that feels true to CLG and our staff. And I know like a lot of this is a non-answer because I don't think we have the answer yet. I think it'll be something that respects our legacy, but I think something driven by, I would expect driven by our passion for esports and the gaming and the product. I think, um, occasionally I've seen a couple of tweets from Monte Cristo talking about how like, the new wave of investment has taken the fun out of esports, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think, we have an org that still very much has that passion for like the games behind the esports, like the spirit and like the
Not wanting
promise
to
of esports.
corporatize it
Yeah,
too much.
exactly. So I think like that's a tricky balance for me.
Yeah.
Like, how do you run a good company, but how do you stay true to that? And I think like that's a tough problem that a lot of esports orgs face. Um, but to me, I think there's something there in that passion that we can tap into that'll hopefully like drive a direction for us as like a brand and a company. And I think we already do a lot of great stuff that isn't just limited to League of Legends. That sort of pushes along those fronts. Like we run these Samsung Open tournaments where community can sign up like for cash prizes and like get that like broadcasted esports experience, right? Like we over the summer like ran a bunch of summer camps around like some of our gaming titles and careers in esports to like give like young gamers a understanding of like what the possibilities are or like how to get better at their crafts, right? and
Mm-hmm.
and we also ran like a big Guilty Gear tournament that I think like was one of the first big stream tournaments for that title after it came out. And um, there's a lot. I love that we have a lot of like external facing empowerment there, and that I love that we're very community driven. And again, that like every single person here, I can't think of a person that I've met at CLG that like doesn't love games, and like I
Mm-hmm.
that is not the case at a lot of esports are. So I think it's tapping in that energy that to build something that resonates. I don't have the pithy like one liner or like
Yeah.
how exactly that like that like represents itself in our marketing, but I think like there are the roots of something there,
Yeah.
and hopefully that's what we identify and build on.
Well, you still got to bring all the leadership away on a weekend retreat, write that vision statement and the mission statement, and put it on all your letterhead, right? And isn't that how you run a business? I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
it's step
we'll see
zero, right?
about that. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, sometimes. uh, well, I'd love to get a little bit more into some of the fine details to whatever extent we're able to. But, um, you know, you mentioned how LCS teams will often, once as soon as they're out of the running, and especially not going to Worlds or whatever it is in the case of CLG, you guys, your competitive year's over, other than Academy, which is your Academy team still playing in the Proving Grounds qualifiers right now. But since you do have this opportunity to get started kind of early in the off season, what are your priorities over the next few months on the competitive front? How do you kind of start preparing your approach, and how directly involved are you in that?
Yeah, I think it's so I think it's a multi-step process, right? I think the one that we're in and the one that's I think pretty important is taking stock, right? Like doing all the right things at the end of the season, like doing for me like it's another round of conversations with all of our players and our staff on like how the year went, what we were good at, what we were bad at, and just really take like going into the off season, like have an understanding what we left with and what happened
Yeah.
this year. So I think the first phase is just like that discovery.
Yeah.
I think the second phase is looking at what we have to bring to bear into the off season. Like I think you mentioned some players that we have contracts with next year. I think you know, as teams get eliminated and as like we get into worlds, like I think the picture sort of become it's like navigating into fog of war, right? Like the
Sure.
picture of what the map is becomes more clear sort of as time develops and as we poke more and as we understand more. So I think second phase is understanding like what'll be out there. And then the third phase is very quickly figuring out like what fits us, what fits our priorities and the resources we have bring to bear, and like what what is what's feasible or what can we accomplish in terms of a roster,
Hmm.
staff, and operation that fits what we want to do, right? So I think it's timely that we're doing all the strategy and brand work now because
Hmm.
like ideally like all of that fits together, right? Like our league team should hopefully like sing the values of what our org stands for, right?
Yeah.
Or like have a bunch of players that work with that and competitively at the same time like at the same time we're figuring out this brand stuff, like I think it's this first discovery and this first look back, like these first three phases of seeing what's out there is when we figure out like who do we want to be, how does that manifest itself for what our targets are for next year, like what do we need to be building for year two, year three, like what's our long-term vision.
Hmm.
That's kind of stuff that I don't know that we did fully thoroughly in previous off seasons from what I've heard, so
Yeah.
hopefully some of that structure helps give us that direction and that longer term outlook, and you know you want to be putting yourself in the best position that you can, right? To like potentially pivot and do other things because like
Yeah.
it's like
Unpredictable.
stuff's gonna happen, right? Like this past off season, like granted,
Yeah.
I've only been a part of two, but like that felt pretty crazy, right? Like
Yeah.
everything was set, everything blew up, everything was set again. Like
Yeah.
Osh players became residents and like so like hopefully this off season isn't as crazy, but you wanna build a I'm gonna sound like a record, but like you want to build a good framework and be able to pivot properly and sort of to do the best you can within like your
Hmm.
resource constraints and in adherence with your vision. So I think part of this is now like figuring out what that vision is and what the landscape's going to be so we can operate fluently in that space.
Yeah. So, like, I imagine going into this, you have a lot of core pieces that you need to assemble, right? You have to determine how do we feel about our current, like, managerial and support staff? How do we feel about our current coaching staff? How do we feel about the roster pieces we have? Uh, you have to kind of determine each of those pieces and what you're going to do there. You have to look at what's going to be available, right? Who are the free agents, either currently or about to become free agents that we expect? Who might we be able to start speaking to earlier if we talk to their teams first? But you also have to do this vision kind of building of, are we going to aim to compete in this current, like, are we going to try to get to Worlds in 2022, or are we going for a more longer term developmental project, kind of the Golden Guardians FlyQuest approach from this year, I would say. Which of those do you kind of slot in first, or how much does it happen in parallel?
Yeah, well, I think like that's especially with the coming off of a year like this one, it's funnily it feels there's some similarities to EG, right? Where like
Mm.
who we want to be is going to be defined by the talent available and what we think we can
Yeah.
accomplish and achieve, right? So I think like if we take a look at the market and we just like see a world's capable team that's
Yeah.
out there, like
You'll
we'll
go for
figure
it, right?
out like that becomes the identity, right? If we don't see that kind of talent availability, it's like okay, like if we don't think we can be successful this year without spending like $10 million or something, like what
Mm.
makes sense for us like now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and like what's the cost
Mm.
benefit of like the 1 year trade-off, the 2 year trade-off, and I think that's defined by talent availability. I think every year there's always a couple players that you don't expect to be available that always were. Like I don't think we expected Peter Dunn to be like available as our head coach
Sure.
like last offseason as early as he did. So um that's defined by I think that's defined by the market, and I think that's what we have to wait and see. But I think for us it's like, okay, like what do we what scenarios can we plan for or like see out there,
Hmm.
and like how do we execute like given those scenarios with like different pieces being available, like different positions having different talent availability, all that kind of stuff. So I think the answer is like we don't yet know like where we want to be punching or who we want to be, but we're
Yeah.
preparing ourselves for like what all of those what all those possibilities look like.
So do you have people in the org already looking at kind of starting to paint that landscape of, hey, these players are going to be free agents and here's how we kind of rank them, and here are the players in our org that we think are the most worth like retaining, or these are the ones we're willing to walk away from, those kinds of things. Like, are there people putting those resources together already?
Yeah, I think so. We're still in first phase, right? Like we're
Yeah.
still like, the season just ended. I think like we wanted to there's a little bit of a mental reset that I think has
Sure.
to happen just to separate yourself from some of the challenges we had and just like the competition and bring some fresh eyes to bear on it. So
Hmm.
some of the discussions with players have started off obviously like Brox and Finn. We sent them home last week, so we had some conversations with them before they went out, and we'll
Hmm.
continue to have some of those player and staff conversations over the next week. So so sort of in parallel to that, like I think that like these are the things that help paint the picture for what we have to build with and what experiences went well and what didn't, what we need to correct for and what we need to keep doing, and that sort of feeds into it. So I would say it's all happening in parallel, but it's shading
Sure.
towards the let's understand sort of what happened this
Yeah.
year, and for me it's getting fluency in that, right? Because I wasn't here for most of the season, right? I just kind of saw the end of it. So
Hmm.
um, there's definitely, an understanding that needs to be built before you can drive forward.
I think the classic picture you get in a lot of traditional esports, or sports rather, when it comes to like handling a free agency opening or a draft or something like that, is you get these war room visions of a group of staff, the scouting staff and the general manager and the assistant GM sitting around this big table and phones everywhere and laptops open. Who are the people in your org? Like, are you at that stage, or you're saying like, here's who the core of our war room is yet? Do you look at that? Like, is that a prerequisite step for you of like building that war room table of people who can give input on this before you can really start executing?
Yeah, I think there are different ways to answer that question, but I think like first of all, like absolutely, because like I don't have the eyes, right? Like I'm candidly like a gold level League of Legends player. I think like with my professional
Hold on.
experience and with my
Stop targeting me.
competitive with my competitive experience, like, I think my comparative strength is trying to like ask the right questions and build the right structure and the right decision trees and the
Hmm.
right strategic framework. So like that's my focus, right?
Yeah.
And so to for that to actually have any value, like you have to have the right people in the room. And I think that
Hmm.
that's like, our candidly, like the understanding we have to build is like what do we have that we bring into that, and like where are we potentially making changes for the upcoming year? Like we're not there yet. Like it's first like the discovery portion, right? But I
Yeah.
think like in terms of how I like to operate, like in an ideal world, and like this is not what we had the first year we did EG, right? But we had it in the second year. Is that like you have a solid structure and process. You have that war room and you know how it works, right? Like
Hmm.
everything should drive everything should drive in unison. Like I would say, I don't think I reveal too much here. Like I would say like, EG when we were picking players, when we were looking at various roster scenarios, like the input of the coaches is super important. The input of
Yeah.
our analysts is super important. And then like, you ideally have like a point person or a GM like for like Andy or something who's
Hmm.
collating all that information, taking in all that information and like helping to build like, like build these scenarios. Like, okay, this is what the roster could like. This is plan A, this is plan B, this is plan C. Like this is
Hmm.
what it looks like with like these different players in this
Yeah.
position. This is what it looks like with these different players. And this is player A we think leads to players B, C, and D, but like player X leads to Y and Z, right?
Hmm.
So like, I can't do that. Like because I don't talent evaluate, right? Like I think the the strength and everything you've seen from EG this year is like I helped channel those discussions and structure those discussions. But that's off the back of like the scouting done by Nasser, by Peter, by all those folks. So similar here, like I would like to not pull any triggers before we have like the tactical eyes on it, and that
Yeah.
means making sure that we have that right, that good
Yeah.
tactical suite of talent, and an operation that knows, is comfortable like working with me, help working through some of those decisions and strategic frameworks. And for me, it's learning about like, I have a lot of I have a lot of authority here just by nature of leading the org, but also like help painting the picture to MSG, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that's something you deal with at any org if you're not like the owner and CEO the way I think some other teams have, right? Like
Yeah.
for me at EG, for me at and I presumably for me at MSG, it's like I can craft a vision and then I have to sell that vision, right?
Yeah.
Like and I have to get like my boss or my executive suite or like my investors on board to any sort of thing. And that's tough sometimes. And I think like that comes down to like how much trust you have from your org or from your leadership, and it comes down to to how you navigate that relationship and how you can tell that
Hmm.
story, right? And I think that's where I'm stronger because I have some of that consulting background. It's funny, like at one point in the off season last year, like some executive came up to me, is like, I think we hired the wrong coach. And it's like, hold on, like, what are you talking about? Right? And I think it's like validating to see him get coach of the like see our staff get
Sure.
coach of the year, right? But it's like
Yeah.
it's putting yourself in their shoes, right? Like, they're not necessarily in that, like when you're dealing with, for
Yeah.
me, like when I'm dealing with MSG or whatever, like, if they don't know like who all the players are, like they don't know who Tomio is, right? Like these are
Yeah.
just kind of like random gamer tags. It's like,
Yeah.
all right, how do I properly paint the picture of like this is who
Yeah.
this player is, this is who this coach is, this is what he helps us do, how we structure things and all that stuff.
Hmm.
And like, going to bat against that, right? And like
Yeah.
painting the right picture and
Because
building the right
I
strategy.
imagine you have to build that trust from the upper levels in order to determine like staff budget and things like that, right? So like when you look at the budget you have, and I'm trying to go just from memory on what you have kind of in the managerial coaching kind of staff right now. You've got Tafo as the GM, you've obviously got Moon as the head coach. I know you guys brought in Prussian as an analyst. You've got an academy coach. I'm sure there are some other people who work with the team who I'm just not as familiar with, but have you taken much stock of that and seen opportunities where maybe you can either make some additions or make some changes or some things where like how directly involved are you going to be in that kind of org chart, I guess?
Yeah, I would say pretty directly involved, and I think like I think what we do, it's a that becomes like an elevated conversation, not just about like our competitive operation, but like with back to MSG
Hmm.
and like thinking about the overall business in terms of like what resources we have to bring to bear. Like, I don't think it's going to be the same pop, like to EG's credit, right? Last year we added like three or four more coaches and like a whole
Yeah.
amateur team, right? Like, and that was awesome. It was amazing to be able to have that playground, and I think that stemmed from the fact that like, we built a clearly articulated vision for like what we wanted to do with the whole program, and our leadership had the confidence to just like give us those resources to do that thing. I
Hmm.
think here at CLG, like, um, that's where I have to get up to speed as quickly as possible, right? Because it's understanding like, okay, like what tools do we have, what resources do we have, what are the budgets, like how are we, how does that fit, what kind of coaching staff we want. And I think also, Tim, that's defined by like who you're able to bring in, right?
Yep.
Like,
Availability. Yeah.
yeah, and like, I think Peter's the kind of coach where he's an excellent leader. Like he's a great executive coach, and I think like, it's well publicized what he did with Splice and how he ran things, and like having someone like that lets you hire a bunch of other coaches that he can manage and leverage well, right? Like if we
Hmm.
have a head coach that's like that, like great, we're build out the staff, right? But if we have a head coach who doesn't need so much, like you can't leverage and develop a whole staff in so much as just someone who's focused on the league team and like running a good team and focusing on the five players ahead of you, like that means we can't take advantage in the same way like the whole entire coaching staff and like the
Yeah.
whole program, right? Like that's why I don't know if amateur makes sense for us. Like the approach we take in academy is probably different. Like it all stems from like what our capabilities are and who we have in the room. So that's why I think we start with like, we start with staff. We take a look at players and we figure out like how we build from there.
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like you're very much at the start of the process of determining how do we feel about the current kind of staff we have and the current resources for that.
Yeah, because I think like, it would be doing ourselves an injustice if I just came like, let's say I weren't as conservative, right? And I just came in, it's like, oh like crud, we got like 10th place, like it's time to just fire everyone and start from scratch, right?
Yeah,
I don't think that's like the smart thing. I think that would be pretty reactionary, right? Like you don't
yeah,
like, we want to take these things seriously, certainly. We want to take the last couple years, certainly, but it's not like you don't
hmm
want to over rotate. So I think before executing, it's like I think that's really why this discovery phase I keep referring to is important because it's just, what do we have, right? And what
hmm
do we have and like what worked for us? What do we want to keep as a part of our identity going into the next year? And how do we build off of that?
So coming in as someone like yourself, who as you said, you're not necessarily someone who has a great eye for scouting player talent or things like that, and you come in and you want to determine in your staff what kind of resources you have for that kind of thing. What do you bring to bear when you've had a coaching staff and a managerial staff that has all been working together throughout the year, and you want to how do you determine the quality of their ability to build these rosters and to evaluate these players if you don't feel you're bringing that skill set in yourself?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I think one, it's the start of the baseline. Like again, this is the fog of war thing, right? Like you
Mm,
discover things along the way, and like I think the baseline is, you start. That's why you start with talking to the players and staff that you had this year because you have an understanding of you know everyone's opinions on how everyone else did and how
yeah,
things worked and didn't work over the last year, and like every one of those conversations probably has like a percentage of the truth, but you get towards like a truth of just like
hmm
where we are on this year, and I think as you move forward and I'll take this back to EG, right? Like as we were evaluating staff and hires and coaches, like, your initial your initial steps open up your further steps, right? Like we would have I don't think we in year one compared to year two, like our expertise when we were bringing on coaching staff and stuff like
yeah,
evolved significantly, right? Like just thinking about year two, everything we had to bring to bear, like when you have like me, Andy, like Nasser and Peter, like
hmm
interviewing every single coaching candidate, like, you're pretty confident in that picture, right? And
yeah,
it sort of you start with one piece and you move to the next. And I think for me, finding those first couple pieces, I think you know, um, that comes down to a very solid interview process. I think it's seeing how people think. I think it's taking a look at the work that folks have done in the space and processing like how much of that was them versus just like the players being crazy versus
yeah,
like whatever. Like and trying to get to, finding quality and
yeah.
building from that quality to engender more quality.
Yeah, and I guess like to get a little more concrete with what I'm thinking about is, when you were hiring Peter Dunn, for example, how he comes in with a certain reputation and his teams have accomplished certain things, but you don't want to just hire on that reputation, right? So I imagine you leaned on someone like Nasser, who's the
Yeah,
kind of
I think
strategic
I think
analyst, and say,
Peter's I think I'm okay to talk
how do we
about.
measure Peter's game knowledge, right? Like,
Yeah, I think we're okay to talk about this because Peter's actually tweeted about it publicly. But like, I think it was important for us to actually have a process wherein like you see whether or not the person you're hiring knows what they're talking about, right?
right,
Like, and
and
like
that's
you
really what I'm
have
getting at here, right?
yeah, and like you have different folks to. I hope Peter doesn't feel like I'm putting him on blast or anything. Like you have different folks to have different interviews, right? Like for like I think when Nasser had a conversation with him, it was very tactical. Like when Andy had a
hmm
conversation with him, it was like about players and management and stuff. And with me, it was very much conversation about like who are you, what's the structure, like what are EG's priorities, and like what's like the vision statement, right?
hmm
And I think similarly, like if we're like let's say hypothetically like we were interviewing for like a new like GM or something, right? Like, I think the first step would be like, are you a fit? Are you a culture fit? Like, what do you,
hmm
how do you, this is CLG. This is like what we're working with. Like, is this a situation that like works for us, right? And then you need to measure them on like their League of Legends ability and like how they like scout talent and stuff. And then
hmm
you also have to measure like how do they fit with like me, right? Or like how do they fit with like the Oregon leadership and like what are
How
your
well will
presenting
we work
skills
together? Yeah.
and how do you structure? Yeah. So, um, those are all like super interesting questions, and that kind of process extends to like everyone, right? Like it extends to head coach, it extends to your assistant strategic coaches, it even extends to your analysts. Because,
Mhm.
I think the orgs with like the best culture fits and that cohesion are the ones that I think tend to be the most successful. That's at least the hypothesis we had last year, and I think it's worked out pretty well for EG, seeing how they've done over the year. And um, you know, it's here. It's like seeing what bits and pieces of that work and
Mhm.
what bits and pieces do we want to replicate from like my philosophy that and Andy's philosophy. It was not just my philosophy, but from what I saw work there, and like how does that fit us and what we want to do.
Yeah. I mean, is there any situation where you'd kind of triangulate some of that information with sources outside the team and say like, hey, internally, some of our coaching staff felt like this person, you know, had these opinions, and we think that's a really positive sign of their game knowledge. But what do you think? Like, just to get the outsider perspective, or is that something where you feel that's maybe a little off
Yeah, I
base?
mean,
Or
like I think anytime you look at like a player or staff, like if you have like the stronger your network, the better an opinion you can build, right? It's like,
yeah,
hey, like you played with this guy like 4 years ago in this random like challenger league, right? Like what was that
yeah,
like? Or like, or you're friends with this player who played for this coach. Like what did he think about? What was his experience? Like I think those things are, you have to understand those are all
sure.
word of mouth
Hmm.
experiences and references, but like they're data points and like so it's just like solving any problem, right? You gather as much data, you weight it according to how much you value that data or how accurate you
That
think it
source,
is,
yeah,
and you use that to build a decision. Yeah, this is
yep.
why I'm on Oracle's Elixir. It's like, I think we try and like that's the kind of thing that I think is born out of good process and
Hmm.
good organization, right? Because
Yeah,
like if
not being
you're
haphazard, or yeah,
yeah, like if you're swayed by like the last thing you heard, you're just going in a new direction every
yeah,
moment, right? I think like that consistency and like that's where the frameworks are useful.
yeah, for sure. Well, we'll wrap things up with one question here that CryptoXD left in the Twitch chat, and I appreciate that. And people are always able to submit questions for the guests in advance if you go on patreon.com/oracleselixir, and I announce the guest a day or two before the show. But this one came from Twitch chat, and he asks, how challenging is it for you coming into CLG, having to appeal to the older diehard fans while also looking towards the future and what you want to build on?
Yeah, I think like that's the crux of it, right? I think it's a lot of what I spoke about earlier, where it's crafting something that's respectful of our legacy and takes a glance back, but also like evolves the brand, right? Like I think fortunately, like we're pretty intelligent fans. I think that, if you look at some of the discourse around the team, it's just like, what's the plan, right? Like what is
Yeah,
the direction? And also like what are you gonna do with the brand? I think like, you know, there are ways to do that well and not so well, right? Like
sure.
you take a look at sometimes like, one way of doing that is like refreshing the logo and doing something different, right? I'm not like that's
Hmm.
not something I don't know if that's something we're gonna do or anything, right? But like, but
Hmm.
that's like a microcosm example of like you want to be respectful to your legacy, but like you want to also do something different and build towards the future, right? And like I think for us, like the core fan base is important and like we know a league's a huge part of our identity and obviously like with
Hmm.
off season coming up like that's a big focus of what we do, but CLG is not just a League of Legends org, right? That's our core and our history and it's definitely an important part of who we are, but we have CLG Red, right? Like we have
Hmm.
the best women's Counter-Strike team in the world. We have one of the
Yep.
best women's Valorant teams in NA, and I think and those are just like two of our teams, right? We have
Yep.
Fortnite, we have Smash, we have a bunch of stuff going on. I think, um, this is a League of Legends podcast, so I won't get into it too much, right? But it's like, how do we build an identity that like honors what everything we're doing across the board too, right? And like
Hmm.
that's an identity that obviously will have ties to our core fan base in League of Legends, but it's also like where do we want to go and how do we evolve as an esports org? Because I think I think I think just being the legacy org and just paying respect to history alone is not enough. I think you need to like
Yeah.
evolve beyond that. And that's our challenge. That's like the strategic vision. That's the question I couldn't answer earlier because like we're figuring it out.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you very much for joining me on the show today, Greg. Do you have any final messages for CLG fans or the LCS community, and anything that people should be looking for or paying attention to?
Yeah, I think just CLG fans, I'm super excited to be on board. Obviously, like, we didn't end the split in the best way that we wanted. And, I think we have a lot to learn and I have a lot to learn coming into this role, but I'm generally excited for what the future will bring. Definitely want to hear from you all, like, what the experience has been and what it'll be like along the way. And, looking forward to building together. I think there's a lot that we can build excitement around and a lot of ways for us to evolve. I think, it's going to take some time. All these things don't happen overnight, but super excited for what we can do here and super excited to be hopefully leading this org to new and awesome and exciting things.
Well, best of luck with that, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. You can support the TrueSight podcast at patreon.com/Oracle's Elixir. You can subscribe to the show on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, as well as at anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server, where we talk about League of Legends esports and other games and data science and a lot of other topics. Links for all of those things will be in the show notes. This has been the TrueSight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhusen. Thanks for listening.